It was supposed to be just another quiet day at the local bar. But when a group of cocky bikers stroll in, they set their sights on the wrong target. Laughing and mocking a blind veteran in a wheelchair, they think they've found an easy victim. What they don't know is that this isn't just any disabled man. He's a legendary Special Forces veteran with a past that could put their bravado to shame. As the bikers push his buttons, they unknowingly walk straight into a storm they're not ready for. The tension rises, and the air is thick with uncertainty. Will the veteran let them get away with it, or will he show them a side of him they never saw coming? Stay tuned, things are about to get intense. The veteran, named Frank, had seen more than most could imagine. His days in the Special Forces had earned him medals and respect in the military, but those days were behind him now. The bar was his sanctuary, a place to quietly drink and reflect on the life he'd left. He didn't want trouble, but he also wasn't afraid to face it. The bikers, led by a man named Jack, weren't used to being challenged. They had a reputation in the town for causing trouble wherever they went, and they thrived on intimidation. But Frank, sitting silently in his wheelchair, wasn't intimidated. There was something about his calm, steady presence that seemed to unnerve Jack, but the biker leader dismissed it. Little did he know, Frank wasn't the easy target he thought. As the bikers gathered around Frank's table, the taunts started to grow louder. Jack leaned in close, sneering. "What's a blind old man like you doing in a place like this? Shouldn't you be home collecting pity?" His voice dripped with mockery, but Frank didn't flinch. His fingers lightly tapped the edge of his glass, the only sign that he was even aware of their presence. The rest of the bikers laughed, their voices echoing through the dimly lit bar, each one eager to take their turn at humiliating him. But Frank remained silent, unmoved. Across the room, the bartender, Sarah, watched nervously. She knew Frank's story. She'd heard it from the regulars who respected him, but even she didn't know the full extent of his past. All she could see now was the calm in his eyes, and it sent a shiver down her spine. Was he really just a broken man? Or was there something more lurking behind those steely eyes? Jack, growing bolder, jabbed a finger toward Frank. "I bet you couldn't even fight back if you tried," he taunted. "You're just a shell of a man." But Frank's expression didn't change. His mind was sharp, despite his blindness. He could hear the mocking tone in Jack's voice, the shifting weight of the other bikers as they circled closer. His fingers curled around the arms of his wheelchair, muscles tightening under his worn jacket. Sarah took a step closer, almost instinctively, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. She knew Frank's presence had always kept trouble at bay in this bar, but now she wasn't sure how much longer he could keep it under control. Her eyes flickered between Frank and Jack, sensing that something big was about to happen. The tension was unbearable. Frank's voice finally broke the silence, low and steady. "You don't know who you're messing with." His words sent a ripple of surprise through the room. Even Jack hesitated for a second, uncertainty creeping into his eyes. But it was too late. The challenge had been thrown. Jack took a step back, sizing Frank up. For a moment, the room went still. The other bikers glanced at each other, unsure of how to react. They'd never seen Jack hesitate before. Frank's calm demeanor was like a wall, unyielding and unnerving. But Jack wasn't going to back down. He sneered again, cracking his knuckles as though daring Frank to make a move. "You're nothing but a washed-up soldier," Jack spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You think you can intimidate me with your past." Frank didn't respond. His breathing was slow, steady, each inhale filled with a quiet intensity. He wasn't worried. His instincts were already alert, his mind running through countless scenarios. He'd fought wars, faced real danger. This was just noise. Sarah, still watching from the bar, felt the weight of the moment. She could sense the shift, the subtle change in the air. It was no longer just an argument, it was something more. Her hands trembled slightly as she wiped down the counter, glancing nervously between the bikers and Frank. She knew this was a breaking point. She couldn't just watch anymore, but she didn't. "You're really going to sit there like a coward," Jack growled. "What kind of man are you?" Frank's lip twitched, just the faintest sign of a smile, or was it a grimace? Then, without warning, he spoke again, his voice soft but cutting through the tension like a blade. "I fought battles you'll never understand. You think this is something you can win. You're already out of your league." Jack's face reddened, his hands tightening into fists. He wasn't used to being talked down to, especially not by someone who didn't even look like they could fight back. "You're talking too much, old man. Let's see if your words can save you." The room held its breath. Even the regulars, who'd grown used to Frank's quiet demeanor, could feel the danger now. The air was electric, crackling with a tension that could break at any second. Sarah stepped back, her eyes locked on Frank, her heart racing. Whatever was about to happen, she knew it would change everything. Jack raised his fist, ready to strike, but just as he moved, Frank's hand shot out, faster than anyone expected. The room fell into complete silence as the veteran's grip locked around Jack's wrist, with the force of someone who had held more than a weapon in his life. Jack froze, staring down at the strong, steady hand that had stopped him dead in his tracks. "Last chance," Frank said quietly, his voice like gravel. The tension in the room was unbearable. Every second felt like it could be the last before the storm broke. For a brief moment, everything seemed frozen. Jack, his fists suspended midair, his eyes wide with disbelief. The grip around his wrist was ironclad, unyielding. It wasn't just strength that held him in place, but a deep, unsettling calm. Frank's posture didn't change, his eyes not leaving Jack's. "Last chance," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. But just as Jack was about to lunge forward, a new sound cut through the tension, the sharp clink of the doorbell. All heads turned as the door to the bar swung open, and a tall figure stepped inside. At first, no one recognized him. The newcomer wore a leather jacket and a dark, weathered cap, his face partially obscured by shadow. But as he walked in, the atmosphere shifted. There was something unmistakable in his presence. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She knew that walk. The veteran hadn't been the only one to serve in the wars. The man who just entered the bar was someone else from Frank's past, someone tied to the same dark history. A former comrade, one who knew Frank well enough to recognize when the fight had gone too far. The man's eyes met Frank's, a silent acknowledgement of the danger escalating in the room. Jack noticed the shift too, but he was too far gone in his arrogance to understand it. "Who's this?" Another old man looking for trouble. He sneered, sizing up the newcomer. The man didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the bar, his eyes scanning the room, seemingly unfazed by the escalating confrontation. Frank's grip on Jack's wrist loosened just a fraction, but the biker didn't move, his confusion mounting. What was going on here? Was Frank really just a blind, wheelchair-bound vet? Or was there something more to this quiet, unassuming man? Frank's voice cut through the silence again, this time more deliberate, more commanding. "You should have stayed out of this," he said, not to Jack, but to the newcomer. The words hung in the air for a moment, heavy with meaning. The newcomer nodded slightly, taking a long look at Jack and his gang. "I didn't come to watch old scores get settled. But I sure as hell won't let you cross a line that shouldn't be crossed," he said. The bar was a ticking clock, each second drawing them closer to a breaking point. Jack's gang had stopped moving. Their leader, confused but still dangerous, looked from Frank to the newcomer, a sinking feeling gnawing at him. The knife-wielding biker hesitated, his grip loosening on the weapon as the tension in the room became palpable. Frank, his calm unwavering, turned his chair slightly, never letting go of the moment that had held them all in suspense. Then in a single fluid motion, the newcomer stepped forward, his face finally illuminated by the dim light. It was a face Frank knew all too well. It was Ray, an old Special Forces partner, one who disappeared years ago under mysterious circumstances. His sudden reappearance in the bar sent a ripple of recognition through Frank's chest, a mix of disbelief and relief. Ray spoke first, his voice firm but edged with a kind of sorrow only veterans understood. "Jack," he said, addressing the biker with a calm that sent chills through the room, "you've been running your mouth for too long. Time to pay the price." Jack blinked, the weight of Ray's words crashing down on him. He didn't understand the connection, the history, or the reason why these men seemed so united, but he could feel the danger in their eyes. The room was no longer a battleground for his taunts. It was a battlefield of something far more ancient, where pride and pain collided in silence. Ray turned back to Frank, his gaze softening slightly. "I told you, we can't outrun our past forever," he said, a flicker of regret passing through his expression. Frank didn't respond. Instead, he took a deep breath, the same one he'd taken when facing down death on countless missions. "I didn't come here for this," Frank said quietly. "But you brought it with you." Ray nodded slowly, a bitter smile curling at the corners of his lips. "Yeah, and I brought some unfinished business too." It was then that the final twist unfolded. Without warning, one of the bikers, quiet until now, pulled out his phone and held it up. "You're on camera, old man," he sneered, the grin on his face slowly fading as he realized the mistake he'd just made. "This is going viral. Everyone's gonna know you're just another broken soldier." Frank's fingers twitched at the sound of the phone camera clicking. It was a small action, but to those who knew Frank, it was a signal. Ray, seeing it, didn't hesitate. He turned and knocked the phone from the biker's hand in one swift motion, then stepped back as Frank wheeled himself toward the door. "Take your cameras and go," Frank said, his voice colder than anyone had ever heard it. "This ends now." The bikers hesitated, not entirely sure what had just shifted. But the